Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to wait a couple, maybe another minute or so before we get started.
I think you're good to start now, Victoria.
Okay, that sounds great. I was just waiting for people to join. So, all right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Victoria Victoria Wallace. Walker is my maiden name. And I'm a geologist with Canadian Natural. And today I'm here to talk to you about the future of Canadian energy. So just to give you a bit of background about myself, I'm a graduate from the University of Calgary, and where I got 3 degrees. I have a bachelor's in geography and a bachelor's honors in geology, and I graduated from those in 2009. And at that time, the job market wasn't very great, so I went on to continue more post-secondary school, and I did a master's in geology, which I completed in 2013. I was born and raised in the Calgary area, and I have about 7 years of industry experience. And I've primarily been with oil and gas. I was lucky enough to have 2 summer internships. In 2009, I worked with ConocoPhillips as I was finishing up my undergrad. And in 2010, when I was just starting my master's, I was fortunate to have an internship with Imperial Oil. And then when I graduated with my master's, I landed a job with Shell Canada in 2013. And I worked there until 2017, when Shell sold all their heavy oil assets to Canadian Natural, and I've been there ever since. So most of my experience in industry has been in heavy oil. I've done both thermal and cold production, including CHOPS, which is cold heavy oil production with sand. And it's been a very exciting career so far, but I do realize that, especially in Calgary, this market's pretty strained, and I am pretty lucky to have had the experience that I've had. So today I want to talk about where does Canada stand on the global stage in terms of energy use, and what is Canadian Natural doing as a company to be part of that solution? And before we kind of dive into that, I just want to give you a bit of an idea about what the company profile looks like. So Canadian Natural is Canada's largest producer in oil and natural gas. And we have our largest foothold in North America, but we do have a very balanced and diverse production mix. You can see here in the charts that over half of our production comes from light crude oil, as well as our oil sands mining and upgrading. And we also have about 21% of barrel oil equivalent of natural gas production, as well as 28% of heavy crude oil. We're fortunate because we also have exposure to the international Brent markets, as we have assets in the North Sea as well as offshore Africa. And that really helps balance our portfolio in terms of a marketing perspective. And Canadian Natural is lucky in that most of our production is a long life, low decline mix of production. So it's pretty favorable in terms of having diverse as well as sustainability. So as you can see, we are an oil and gas company. So what does that mean in a changing world, especially when we have climate change at the forefront of many developed nations? How do we deal with our industry in terms of that? And before I kind of get into that, I want to kind of look at, I want to take a look at a global perspective on kind of where we're at and what energy means to the world. So when we look at the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we can see that there's kind of three main key pillars here with the 17 different development goals that they've outlined. And number one is eliminating poverty. And as some of you may know, that 13% of the global population still lack access to electricity today, despite all of modern technology. And actually, in addition to that, 3 billion people still rely on things like coal, wood, charcoal, and animal waste for cooking and heating. So in order to eliminate poverty, energy is going to be a key pillar to address those concerns. And you can see here that number 7, the United Nations has identified affordable and clean energy as one of the main things for sustainable development. But also in that those goals is climate action. So the key message here is how can we eliminate poverty while also providing affordable and clean energy, but by also taking into account climate change and environmental impacts and trying to minimize those as much as possible. All of these different goals are, despite all their different, specific goals for each developmental stage, they're all intertwined on a much deeper level. So you can't have one without the other. So we have to find a way to find that solution in a path forward to provide sustainable development for the entire world. Everyone has a right to energy to meet their basic human needs, and that's something that we can be a part of in the future. But let's just take a look at our country. Canada is so fortunate in that we don't really need to think about where our energy comes from because it's so accessible to us. But even as big as our country is, you can see here on the diagram on the left that there is quite a bit of diversity in terms of dominant sources of electricity in each Canadian province. So in Alberta, our primary sources are coal and natural gas, but in a lot of parts of the country, hydro is the main source of electricity. So it's great that as a country, we're able to have such a diverse energy mix. And this chart on the right here is a summary of Canada's energy consumption from 2000 to 2016. And you can see here that our oil and our natural gas and our hydro have been more or less consistent over the years, but that we do see a decrease in coal use, as well as a slight increase in nuclear, as well as renewables. And that's really exciting for Canada because there's always things that we can improve on. But the key message here is that lots of different energy sources are needed in order to meet the energy demands of Canada and also the world. And I'd like to point out in this chart here on the bottom right is that you can see for all the different energy sources, whether it's oil, natural gas, coal, nuclear is more or less stable, but hydro and renewables, you can see that over that same time span of 2000 to 2016, you're seeing increases in all of those different energy demands amongst all the different types of sources. So the key message here is that the world needs all energy, and even Canada needs all energy. And it's really important that not one source of energy is better. Each source has their pros and cons. But it's obvious that some sources work better in different places than others. And that's really important when we address global issues. So like I said, the world needs all types of energy. And, as we all know, there's a prominent narrative in much of the media that we need to get off fossil fuels. But, the reality is, as I've mentioned, that the world needs all types of energy. And even in Canada, we see this diversity, as I shown in the previous slide. And this is a really interesting chart as well. And this chart was made by the International Energy Agency in 2020. And they tried to look at a scenario of energy demand that was aligned with the Paris Agreement goal, meaning that if we keep up with certain energy demand, that we will still be well below a 2-degree scenario in terms of climate change. And even when you look at a scenario like this, you can see projecting out from 2021 onward that over nearly half of the energy will still be coming from things like oil, natural gas, and even coal to some extent. And so this is just really important because these types of energy sources will be part of that solution moving forward. And even as we project out into 2040, you can see that there is still going to be about 59 million barrels of oil required per day. The demand on natural gas will remain more or less constant. And the other really exciting thing about this chart is that even though we will still be relying on things like oil and natural gas, that you are starting to see an increase in things like nuclear, hydro, bioenergy, as well as other renewables. And it's projected that, by the time 2040 happens, there will be about 140% increase in these types of energy. And that's really important, just because, as I previously mentioned, that we do need all types of energy to meet the demands of the world, but also that some energy sources will work better than others in certain places. And the other important thing to keep in mind about this is that as time progresses, there will be more technology advances and innovations that will make these other things more affordable and reliable in places that maybe they weren't always, it wasn't always the case for. And, it's as much as we want to get off coal, that is still going to be an important part of providing energy for the future, just because it is such a cheap energy source that is accessible to many people that maybe didn't always have energy available to them. But aside from energy uses, there's other uses for oil and gas other than fuel and energy. And many people don't realize that natural gas is a big feedstock supplier to petrochemicals, but also about 25% of every barrel of crude oil is used for some sort of product. So that could be things like pharmaceuticals, eyeglasses, plastics, tires, and other consumer goods like your phone and things like that. And this is actually an area of oil demand that is growing the fastest right now. And it's exciting because it diversifies the use for oil and gas. So how can Canada be a leader to meet the energy demands of the world? Well, right now, Canada is a reliable supplier of premium oil and gas. Canada is the 5th largest producer in the world, but we actually have the 3rd largest reserves in the world. And so there's definitely room to increase the amount of production and product that we can bring to the world to meet those energy demands. Right now, pipelines are our biggest bottleneck for getting that product to the rest of the world, just because we are so constrained on getting our product to other places around the world other than the United States. So when things like TMX will come online, that will really help and impact our ability to be a global leader in oil production and maybe increase our our ranking in a graph like this. And I did want to mention that this graph was made pre-pandemic. So, but the overall trend kind of remains the same today. And then we're kind of always neck and neck with production in Iraq. So we're the 5th largest producer, but we are first in international score ranking called ESG. And ESG stands for Environment, Social, and Governance. And this is a ranking that's applied to different countries around the world, and it takes a look at how countries address environmental concerns like climate change and pollution, as well as social concerns related to workplace practices and safety, as well as human rights. And then governments, things like regulations and ethics. And Canadian companies are consistently ranked among the highest on this ESG ranking. And this is just really important because this allows us to be able to produce a product and bring it to market in a responsible and ethical way. And, you know, especially when we're dealing with things like climate change, we need to make sure that if energy demand is going to stay, that we do that as responsibly as possible. And you know, Canada's regulations really are top tier. I've heard some statistics say that if the rest of the world followed the regulations that we have in place in Canada with things like, you know, flaring and stuff like that, then you would see a decrease in greenhouse gases by about 20% worldwide. So we are really doing a great job in terms of ESG leadership. So as a country, we have a lot to be proud of as Canadians in terms of ESG. But you know, this is something that we must always strive to improve and to do better in. And you know, there are always ways to be more efficient, and you know, stuff like that. So you know, let's just kind of take a look at what Canadian Natural is doing specifically to help meet these goals and continue our excellence in terms of ESG. So Canadian Natural is committed to environmental performance. And one of our primary focuses is reducing our environmental footprint. And we're very proud of the action that we've taken on climate change, and we're always committed to doing more. One of our aspirational goals right now is achieving net zero emissions from our oil sands operation. This is a very lofty goal, and it's something that we're striving towards. But there's a lot of other things that we're currently doing and other goals that we've set for ourselves as well. So some of our goals include reducing our oil sands greenhouse gas emissions intensity by 25% by 2025, as well as reduce our exploration and production methane emissions by 20% by 2025. We also are striving to reduce our in situ freshwater intensity by 50% by 2020. And so that's next year. And also reduce our mining and freshwater intensity by 30% by 2020, also next year. So we're always looking at ways to improve. So at Canadian Natural, we recognize that there's that need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and you know, just become a better operator overall. And we're going to do this by leveraging technology and Canadian ingenuity. And there's a lot of fantastic things that are happening right now in Canada and you know, even around the world. So there's lots of opportunities to reduce emissions further. And this is things like carbon capture, which I'll talk more about in the coming slides, as well as things like acceleration reclamation. An example of that is our in-pit mining IPEP process, which I'll also talk about in the coming slides. But overall, Canadian Natural has invested about $3.7 billion into research and development since 2009. And this is one of the ways that we're going to be getting better. So just to show that, we don't only have these goals in the future, but that we're actively meeting those targets today. So when we look at our oil sands mining and our thermal production from the years 2016 to 2019, we've already seen a 36% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions intensity. And even when we look at our North American exploration and production methane emissions over those same 3 years, we've already seen a 15% decrease in those emissions. So we're always striving to be better. There's kind of two main drivers for these improvements, and one of them is just simply gaining efficiencies as we continuously improve our operations. And the other thing that's been a huge help, especially on the oil sands mining front, is the carbon capture. And that carbon capture is our program called QUEST, and it's a top tier carbon capture and sequester in the world. So CNRL is the largest owner of carbon sequestration, sorry, a bit of a tongue twist there, in Alberta. And it's also the 5th largest owner of carbon capture and sequestration and storage in the world in terms of the oil and gas sector. And we really have an opportunity here to continue this trend to further reduce our emissions. And you can see here in this chart on the left that with this QUEST program, we're able to reduce our carbon emissions by about 2.7 million tons a year, which is equivalent to removing about 576,000 cars off the road annually. So this program here is it's fantastic, and it's leading in Canada and the world in terms of carbon capture and storage. And it really reduces our footprint, and it just, really is a game changer. So other things that Canadian Natural is a part of is that we are a participant in the NRG COSIA Carbon XPRIZE. NRG is a power company in the United States, and COSIA is the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance. And together with XPRIZE, which was a foundation established in 1994, we are looking at ways to convert carbon emissions into other products, and using things for like electricity generation as well as oil and gas production, and just turning something that was originally a waste into something that's of value or usable. And this is a pretty exciting initiative to be a part of, and they'll be announcing the winner of this project later in Q1 of this year. And these kind of things are really important because this is what strives innovation and technology to really change and be game changers for not just the oil and gas industry, but for other industries around the world. And here's just some examples of products that were made using CO2. So an example here on the left, they were able to convert CO2 to upcycle it into something like a watch. And another product that was used for this XPRIZE, and it's actually a finalist, is converting CO2 into things like hand sanitizer or vodka. So it's just a lot of interesting things and potential that can be done, with something that was originally seen as a waste product or a byproduct of producing something like oil and gas. Another initiative that Canadian Natural is a part of that is also very exciting is the Bitumen Beyond Combustion initiative. And this was created by Alberta Innovates, which is a provincial research agency, and it was launched in 2017. And this is trying to look at ways to diversify the use for bitumen to other products other than things like fuel or, what we would typically use bitumen for. So over the next 2 years, Alberta Innovates will offer up to $2 million for innovations that can help advance this initiative. And not only will this help diversify the use of product, but it will also, create diversity in the economy and, could really have a significant impact on the industry's long-term sustainability. So I had previously mentioned this, but this is another super exciting project that Canadian Natural is involved with, and it's actually a project that, it came from the ground up. This is something that was created in-house, and it was to try and figure out a way to, minimize our emissions with the oil sands. And this project is really exciting because with the pilot work that's been done, they've seen a 40% decrease, in greenhouse gas emissions. And that has potential to decrease the cost per barrel by $2 to $3. And perhaps one of the biggest benefits of this project is that it actually eliminates tailings ponds. And that's just really exciting. As you saw in our company profile, the oil sands is one of our largest producers. So if we can figure out a way to improve and perhaps even eliminate all the negative greenhouse gas and other environmental impacts of projects like that, this could be a way that we can really, still produce that product while extremely limiting its impact on the environment. And I actually have a short video here to kind of show you about a little bit more about that in-pit extraction process. And it's what we call IPEP. And this video is available on YouTube. Just search here, The Journey to Net Zero and in-pit extraction, and you should be able to watch it. But I will launch it right now.
The existing process today has been around for a long time. You end up with a mega project type of infrastructure that you build. And with this scale comes also large mines moving vast amounts of material, whether it's the overburden from the top of the deposit or the ore itself, and then getting the ore from the mine, which is often kilometers away, to that central processing facility, and then taking the tailings materials, which in the existing process are fluid tailings, and then pipelining that to the dedicated disposal areas. All that adds up to a lot of material movement, and a lot of material movement adds up to a lot of energy. And so when we look at the existing process and we want to really keep up with the cost pressures that are coming in the oil industry and the environmental pressures to be more sustainable, lower greenhouse gas emitting, and progressing those goals, it became apparent we had to do something different. Refining the existing process wasn't going to get us to where we wanted to be. We really have to step change. The IPEP process was, let's think of a way that we can design a mine to move material the least possible distance. What does it look like an optimal mine plan? And then we'll build a process that fits to support that mine plan. And we said, well, this is what it needs to do. It needs to be small, it needs to be relocatable so it could keep pace with the advance of the mine. And it had to create a dry, stackable type tailings material. So not something that was pumped, but something that was conveyable and could be backfilled into the mine. As we open pit, we'll be able to close pit and reclaim in a progressive fashion.
It really helps reduce our reclamation time. So instead of it being decades, the dry tailings go back into the pit they came out of right away, and we shouldn't have to handle them again. Everyone has friends and family that look down on the oil sands. They only hear the negative things. They don't see the positive things, the amount of effort that we're putting into trying to reduce our greenhouse gases, reduce our footprint. It's really nice to work for Canadian Natural knowing that we can prove it to enough degree that they have faith in us to do this larger scale. It's exciting to be down here.
We are looking towards the next 3 to 4 years to have the first commercial 6,000 tons an hour production through an IPEP process. This process has the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30 to 40% in the production of a barrel of bitumen. Canadian Natural has the goal of net zero GHG production. This is one step on that continuum. And so being part of a project that can actually make that kind of step change in the industry is pretty rewarding. It's pretty exciting. And very much looking forward to seeing it through to the commercial production.
Yeah, so like I was saying, this process is super exciting, and it, like it said in the video, it has a real potential to be a huge game changer, not just for us, Canadian Natural in the oil sands, but potentially, it could be other companies could pick up something like this as well. And it's a pretty exciting innovation that happened right here in Alberta. So just to touch on environmental performance a bit more, Canadian Natural is proactively trying to always reduce our environmental footprints. And these are just some examples of things that Canadian Natural has done. So since 2015, we've reclaimed about 7,600 hectares in North America, exploration and production, which is equal to about 9,400 Canadian football fields. We've also reclaimed about 1,600 hectares of oil sands mining land, which is about 30 West Edmonton malls. And then furthermore, we've already planted 4.3 million trees across all of our operations. So just always trying to improve the environment and return it to its natural state. And this is just another example about what that reclamation process looks like. So you can see on the left that you can see what the land looked like pre-reclamation, and then what it looks like during that process. And then once that process is complete, what it looks like 1 year after. So Canadian Natural is an industry top performer when it comes to land reclamation, and it's really something to be proud of. And many of our other colleagues across the industry are good at doing this as well. So in addition to our environmental commitments, we're also committed to give back to those communities where we live and work. So Canadian Natural works with over 24,000 different landowners, 160 municipalities, as well as 80 different Indigenous communities across Western Canada. And in 2019, Canadian Natural was able to invest about $25 million into communities, as well as have over $550 million worth of contracts with Indigenous businesses, and as well as support about 765 community activities that we either supported or actually participated in. So what does this all mean in terms of what the future looks like for Canadian energy? Well, as I've shown you, there's lots of examples of all this wonderful technology and innovation that's happening. So the future of Canadian energy is really one of excitement. For Canada, unlocking the power of global perspective will make a significant positive impact on global greenhouse emissions. It will reduce poverty, and it will unleash Canadian ingenuity, which can drive both environmental and economic performance. It creates jobs, and it supports investment in a lower carbon future. As well, it strengthens our nation. So Canada really has this immense opportunity to become a world leader on so many different fronts in terms of what we can do to make a difference, not just in Alberta, but in Canada and the world. And as future leaders, you all have the opportunity to become part of this energy solution. And it's just a really exciting time. And there's just a lot of really cool stuff happening right now. Yeah, we just hope you will choose to be a part of it. And on that note, that is the end of my presentation, and I'm more than happy to take questions. Okay, so I'm just bringing up my chat here. Okay, so the first question that I have is from Ro. How do you suppose the new federal impact how do you suppose the new Federal Impact Act change things in terms of pipelines? Will it make it harder or more challenging? Yeah, that's a great question, Ro. And yeah, there's definitely challenges with that. And I think the most important thing is that, you know, at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We all want to take care of the environment, you know, while maintaining the lifestyle that we're, you know, very fortunate to have. So there's definitely some challenges associated with that, but you know, there is some positivity on the horizon. We do have the Trans Mountain Pipeline that is still underway, and that will make a big change. And also other things like LNG Canada that's being built on the West Coast that will also help in terms of getting our product to the markets. And so there's, you know, definitely some things to work through, but there's a lot of other great things that are happening as well. So hopefully, you know, we can just keep chatting with our government and working together to find solutions that will, you know, benefit Canadians as well as other people in the world. The next question is also from Ro. What is the CNRL policy to increase Indigenous through all levels of the business? So that is not something that I'm not very familiar with, but I do know that we work a lot with Indigenous communities with a lot of the projects that we do, but in terms of increasing it through all levels of the business, that is something that I will need to get back to you on. So the next question is, excessive energy consumption should be reduced. Sorry, I'm not sure about this question. It says excessive energy consumption should be reduced, isn't it? Justified use of energy should be there, right? Ro, I don't know if you can maybe get back to the person that asked that question just to get some clarification. So I'm going to circle back to that one. So another question is that we have high scores. Yes, we have high scores all around, but do you feel as though we are over-regulated and the private sector is now limited? So yeah, that's a really great question. So I know on both provincial and federal levels, everyone, you know, everyone at the end of the day has the same goal. We all want to protect the environment. We all want what's best. And, you know, it's, I think with some of the recent changes that have been made, there's definite growing pains, but I am certain that as time progresses, that we'll be able to find a way to find that middle ground and be able to, you know, maintain that production while addressing environmental concerns and just, yeah, moving forward in that right direction. But yeah, sorry, this is a little hard to read right now. Okay, the next question is, what plans does CNRL have to begin addressing Scope 3 emissions? So as of right now, I'm not very familiar with that. So I think the biggest thing in our control as a company is addressing the emissions that we produce. And I'm not very familiar with this, but I believe Scope 3 is the emissions that is produced by the consumer. So as a company, I'm not sure if we're there yet in terms of addressing that. I know a lot of some other big companies have, but because we're primarily an upstream company, I think it's most important for us to, fix what we have direct control in first before moving down the line for dealing with emissions for that. But that does not stop the consumer from doing their part. There's tons of things that we can do every single day to decrease our footprint. And, a lot of it's very simple tasks, shutting your lights off, like taking public transit when possible, and, recycling and all those things like that. Even upgrading your furnace to something that's more efficient, replacing windows and getting better insulation. Those are all things that we can do to reduce our footprint. The next question is, in order to achieve net zero emissions from the oil sands, how does Canadian Natural plan on offsetting any inevitable emissions that result from operations and are not captured by carbon capture? Yeah, another great question. And that's not something I'm entirely familiar with, but there's obviously, to achieve complete net zero, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think carbon capture is going to be a huge part of that. But in terms of what other specific goals are set in place to address other emissions, that I'm not sure of at that time, but I can definitely get back to you guys with better answers for that. That might help explain that a bit better. Another question is, do you have a specific team that is focused on implementing new initiatives with Canadian Natural? Yes, we do have a special technical and innovation task force that is constantly looking for new innovations and technologies that would help help with all of our emissions and efficiencies that we'd like to improve on. So the answer to that is yes. The next question is, does CNRL plan on continuing to build a direct air capture Quest project installations? At this time, I'm not familiar with that, but it's very possible that those communications are happening, and I'm just not involved with that. So for that one, I'm not certain. But again, I can look into that and send an email to Ro with some of these questions. Next question is, Canadian Natural is making things look easy, but it begs the question, why aren't other companies doing this? Do they not just have the funds, or are they not big enough? That's a great question. And I think a lot of companies are doing this. And, one of the feedbacks is that, there have been very successful campaigns that are anti-oil and gas, or they really demonize the oil and gas industry. But a lot of these companies, no matter how small or how big they are, a lot of them are doing something to improve emissions, invest in new technologies, and just trying to find ways to constantly be better. And I think the problem with a lot of companies is that we don't do a very good job of showing that to other people and the general public. And I think that's part of the reason why you've started to see in the last couple of years companies be more vocal about all the initiatives that they've been doing this whole time, but people just have not been aware of. I mean, a lot of people don't know that one of the biggest investors in green initiatives are oil and gas companies. You know, we all recognize the need, you know, that we have to spend the time to research and develop those type of technologies if we do want to see any sort of transition happen. So I think it's just a matter of companies finding effective ways to communicate with the general public, and to just break down those barriers of this kind of false narrative that's been put out there, you know, by some of these other initiatives that are not always sharing fact-based data. Okay, so the next question is, with the rapidly decreasing support for the oil and gas industry and radical shift of focus towards other sources of energy, is there a risk that the success of the net zero projects could be impacted? If so, what are the mitigation strategies in place? Another great question. So I think there's a mentality that there's this radical shift, but in reality, it's not as easy as a lot of people think. And even Elon Musk made a statement the other day where he's like, you know, people think they can just shut off oil and gas and you know, just move to something green. But the reality is, like, that transition is going to take some time. And like, if you automatically eliminate oil and gas right out of the gate, you know, you're going to be really decreasing the amount of reliable energy to a large portion of the population. I mean, even when you look at states like California and Texas, they have a major deep freeze right now. Now, that's not something that happens every year, but a lot of their power has been severely hampered. And, you know, California has increasingly had rolling brownouts because it can't keep up with basic base load power. And then things like in Texas, you know, that has quite a few wind farm for their power generation. A lot of those facilities have frozen and haven't been able to produce that electricity needed just for basic base load requirements. So I think that, you know, I think that that even though there's this appearance that support is decreasing, that need is still, in reality, still very present. And we really need all sources of energy to meet just, you know, the demands that exist today, but also the demands that will exist in the future as we lift more and more people out of poverty, just so that they can meet their basic, you know, human needs and have a good standard of living. So in terms of like, if that will shift the focuses for all these net zero projects, I think if anything, it just encourages industry to reach those net zero projects even faster. And, you know, and that's a really big challenge that we have ahead of us. So it's, you know, and it's a great technological issue that will hopefully, you know, find resolution with some either new technology, innovation, or ingenuity. And it's something that I think we all have to strive for, you know, like even when you look at things like other green sources of energy, so like hydro, even to build dams of that, it requires quite a bit of cement, and a lot of cement facilities are, I believe, run by coal. So it's, you know, everything is interconnected. even when you look at designing solar panels, it requires an immense amount of energy just to manufacture something like that. Even windmills, those are provided by steel. Steels also uses coal as their energy to produce steel products. So everything is so interconnected. I think that source will always be there, even if you shift towards other sources of energy, but that mix will always be key moving forward. Next question is, would you consider it a good idea to start working for the oil and gas industry, even though there is so much uncertainty of stability in future? And they're asking as a recent graduate. Yes, so I totally understand that this is a very, very challenging time right now in the oil and gas sector. I believe most of the attendees at today's conference are engineers. And as you know, an engineering background, you guys are given such a great opportunity with your education that you know, you can work in a multitude of different industries. And you know, your knowledge will always build from one job to another. I know there's definitely a lot more jobs as an engineer right now in the oil and gas industry. For geology, geologists and geophysicists have been severely impacted in Calgary. So it's definitely, I think, more challenging on the geoscience side of things. But yeah, I do think that there is a future. But it's definitely not going to be the same as it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I think the key there will be just that ingenuity and innovation that will be needed to continually strive to be better in the future. And all those things are possible. It just hasn't been fully realized yet, but we're always making improvements and always doing things to be better. And you know, there's a quote from the founder from XPRIZE. His name is Peter Diamandis, and he has two quotes that I really like. And he says, you know, XPRIZE was created to tackle large, difficult world problems, right? And he says that, you know, you should never be satisfied by doing nothing. And that his other quote that I really like is that the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. So, you know, that's where we need people like engineers to really, you know, push the boundaries and think outside the box. And we're so used to doing things a specific way. And it's like sometimes you get narrow-minded, but there's always got to be something else that maybe we haven't thought of yet that can help us reach those energy demands while also you know, minimizing that impact for the environment. So it was kind of a convoluted answer to your question. So I think it just I think it just depends on what your interests are and what you would like to do, and there's definitely opportunity exists out there. It's just a matter of if you're lucky enough to get it. So, but if that's something that you really want to do, I would definitely try to work in oil and gas, because it is very exciting, even to this day. So, and then the last question here is, what is your opinion about the carbon offsetting policies where companies have the option to buy carbon credits if they can't meet their emission reduction goals? Yeah, that's another great question. I think at the end of the day, when you're trying to you know, carbon, or sorry, not carbon, climate change, you know, it's a global issue. It's not just a Canadian issue, it's not an Albertan issue, it affects everybody. So I think as long as that net change is happening, you're going to have some places that create more and then some that's less, and it's going to be this giant balancing act. So if one company is doing really good and, you know, is becoming, you know, there's a lot of talk these days of not just net zero, but net negative. So if those are things that we can achieve, then I think it's just that balancing act of, as long as that overall change is occurring and creating that positive feedback for the environment, that's the biggest thing that matters. So it's yeah, it's just, yeah, it's really just a balancing act, and yeah, we just all got to do our best and do our part, and hopefully we can just really make a change in the years to come. So I think on that note, I will close this session, and I really appreciated the invite to come and talk to you guys today. I want to thank Ro and Hader for all their time that they've spent setting up this conference, as well as all the other people that were involved with the conference. And yeah, I will definitely take note of some of those questions that I didn't know the answers to, and I can send some of those answers to Ro, and hopefully she can figure out a way to share that with everybody. But yeah, thank you again for your time, and I hope you guys have a great day.